עזרי מעם אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ. אל יתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומריך. הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל. אדוני שומריך, אדוני צילך על יד ימיניך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צאתך וברכה מעתה ועד עולם.
Okay, so I just want to introduce myself. My name is Rocky Brody, and I grew up in Chicago with Rachel and John. But not only that, we've been very close friends since John and I were in first grade through 12th grade together. Rachel joined our lives in 7th grade when we were in 7th grade. And we've always been very, very close. And we've always been there for each other as friends through everything. Before social media and Facebook, we kept our friendship going no matter where we lived. Rachel and John were there when we were making Aliyah, before we made Aliyah, when we were selling our house. And I was there at the airport when they made Aliyah and came to Israel. When Hersh was born, we made sure to get Hersh and Itai, our fourth son, together, and they became best friends. Once they came to Israel, Hersh was actually in the Sulam Smachot, the Shabbat of Itai's bar mitzvah. And we've always had a very special friendship that has just lasted through the years, because these are friends. Doesn't matter. No judgment. No matter what differences are, that's what friends are. So I'm inviting you all here tonight to listen to Rachel and John. You probably all feel like they are your friends as well now. But we're here to give chizuk and to get chizuk and to talk about Hersh. And I'm going to hand the mic over now to Rachel.
I'm actually going to stand, because that chair, well, this isn't a problem for me. It might be a problem for John, but it's not going to be a problem for me. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has carved out the time to come be with us tonight. It means the world to us. And walking into a room like this is actually something that's become very, very strengthening for us, which is really meaningful. So here's the plan. First of all, I noticed that there are a lot of Chicagoans in the room, which makes me feel really good because we have the right accent, and now I feel like I'm among my people. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Hersh. And some of you might know some of these things about Hersh, but I want to paint a picture of who Hersh is. And then we're going to show you, there's a 3-minute video that kind of sums up a lot of what's been happening, in this very dark, challenging period. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the actual, October 6th, 7th, and then John's going to speak. So I'm the type of person who likes to know how long the car ride is going to be, so that's why I felt like I should give you the game plan. Hersh is our eldest child. He's our only son. And Hersh is a very curious, funny with like this very dry, sarcastic sense of humor that never goes mean, which I always say is kind of challenging, because if you're sarcastic, it's usually at the expense of a little bit of meanness. Hersh just doesn't have any meanness in him. In fact, John and I talk about how neither of us have ever heard him raise his voice, ever. He doesn't have a big ego. He's very into asking a hard question and giving room for people to answer. Since he was a little boy, he's been obsessed with geography. He always asked for globes or atlases or maps for any big occasion. If it was Hanukkah or if it was his birthday, for his bar mitzvah, he ended up with 5 globes, many atlases and many maps. And the big thing was when he was in first grade, he requested a subscription to National Geographic magazine. So I got him the junior one because he was in first grade. And at the end of the year, when the card came to renew, he said, "I'd like the other one because this one is beneath me." And he's been a voracious reader. He was an early reader. But if I had to call down how to describe Hersh in one word, John and I talk about it a lot pre-October 7th, and we've talked about it a lot since he's been in Gaza. And that word is respectful. And it might sound weird because given the context of what I'm talking about when I say that he's respectful, a couple of years ago, and I don't know if anyone in this room has ever had this happen to them, but a couple of years ago, Hersh came to us and he said, "I'm not going to be keeping Shabbat the way that you do for now, but I would never disrespect you." And so that sounds weird, right? And especially for me, as Rocky mentioned, I wasn't privileged to grow up in a religious home. And I ended up in the school that John and Rocky were at when I was 13. And this way of life, to me, is what gives me meaning. And it's so precious and valuable, obviously, for John and me. And so it was very painful when we had that conversation with Hersh, because, when something's so unbelievably treasured to you, and you're told, "I actually don't want this wonderful gift that you've given me," it was very painful. But then what it looked like when he said, "But I would never disrespect you," is I've never seen Hersh without a kippah. I mean, for sure in our house, but Kal v'chomer, like he would come to visit one of us at work, he always had on a kippah. If we were out anywhere together, no matter where, he would always have a kippah. He always washed before eating bread. And because you hear this splash, 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 splash. So even if I wasn't in the kitchen, I was like, why is he doing that? And I asked him once, and he said, "I'm not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Like, of course I'm gonna wash before I eat bread." And then during Chol HaMoed this year, during Sukkot, we came home, John and I came home one day, and Hersh was out in our sukkah, which we live at the end of Talpiot. They're doing this massive building project. They were digging down 5 stories. So the noise and the dust was terrible this year in our sukkah, unless it was on Chag itself or Shabbat. It was so loud and horrible, and it was one of those days where it was boiling. And we came home, and we see that he's in the sukkah. I opened the sliding door. I said, "What are you doing out here?" He goes, "It's Chol HaMoed Sukkos. You think I'm not eating in the sukkah?" But the thing that touched me and John the most in these past couple of years is that our family is a family, the 5 of us, we have 2 younger daughters. The 5 of us every Friday night walk to shul together, and every Shabbat morning we go to shul together. And even these 2 years since this conversation, Hersh comes to shul. And at one point I asked him about it. And I mean, think about it, like on the Chagim, during Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, if you're not really into this whole thing, that's pretty intense. But he said, "But I don't want Dada to sit alone." So he always came to sit next to John. So I just wanted you to have a little nugget of who he is. And now we'll show you this 3-minute video and kind of get context of what's been happening since the 7th.
Okay, we're going to turn off the lights right now. There we go.
My name is Rachel, and I am the mother of Hersh Goldberg, Polin. The last time I saw Hersh was on Friday night, October 6th. At 11 p.m., Hersh headed out to meet one of his childhood friends. and they were going to go to an all-night nature music festival in the south of Israel, ironically called the Festival of Unity and Love. The next morning, a bomb siren started to blare in Jerusalem. Immediately, 2 texts popped up on my screen. The first text said, "I love you," and the second said, "I'm sorry." I immediately knew something horrible was unfolding in my world. When that massacre began, Hersh and 27 others managed to escape to a roadside bomb shelter and hid inside.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Hamas militants came to the doorway and began throwing in hand grenades. Most of those young people were now dead. Some were alive and wounded and trapped under the dead bodies. We know that Hersh and 2 other young men were ordered to stand, and when Hersh stood up, they all saw that his left arm had been blown off from the elbow. They were loaded onto a Hamas pickup truck and headed toward Gaza. Hersh's last cell phone signal was found inside of Gaza at 10:25 in the morning on October 7th, and since then we know nothing. We have begged the Red Cross and all other international humanitarian aid organizations to find out if the hostages, who are from 33 different countries around the world, who were severely wounded like Hersh, were they treated? The grandmothers, the babies. But our pleas came to no avail. So here I live, in a different universe than all of you. We seem like we live in the same place, but I, like all of the mothers and all of the fathers and wives and husbands and children and brothers and sisters and loved ones of the stolen, we all actually live on a different planet. This planet of beyond pain, our planet of no sleep, our planet of despair, our planet of tears. We, the families of the 200 hostages, are far away on our own planet of agony. But where are you? Where is the world? Why is no one crying out for these people to be allowed access to the Red Cross? Why is no one demanding just proof of life? I implore world leaders who have been working tirelessly to get all the hostages free. I beseech you to remain steadfast, determined, and tenacious, and may God be with you, because the time is running out to save them. The time is running out to save all of us. Lights. Once again, he really could have left that down. So I just wanted, that kind of encapsulates what happened, but I want to tell you a little bit more about the last time that we were with Hersh, which was on October 6th. We went to shul together, the 5 of us, for Simchat Torah. We all danced with the Torah. Hersh had just gotten back from a 9-week trip in Europe where he went to 6 different music festivals in 6 different countries by himself, meeting people from all over the world. And he said to us on Friday, he said, "I'll come with you to shul and we'll go." We were invited to good friends for Shabbat dinner, Chag dinner. He said, "I'll go to that." And then later, Aner, who was one of his 3 best friends from 3rd grade from B'nai Akiva, he said, "Aner and I are going to go and do something fun, so I'm bringing my backpack with me." So he brought his backpack, his camping backpack. So we knew they were going to go out camping somewhere, and we had a great dinner. It was one of those dinners where all of us kind of really noticed at the dinner that it was a great dinner. It was 3 families, and Hersh was regaling us with tales of his travels in the summer. And right around 11 o'clock, he kissed me, he kissed John, and he hugged our hostess. And I thought, what a good boy. And we were eating in the sukkah, even though it wasn't Sukkot anymore. There was no schach. Don't worry, Alon Shvut. We know the rules. And he turned around in the doorway and he said, "Love you, see you tomorrow." And that was 129 days ago. The next morning, at 7:30 in the morning, John left for shul because he's the gabbai at our shul, and all the gabbais in the room. What's the hardest day of the year for the gabbai? Simchas Torah, right? So he left at 7:30, and I thought, well, it's going to take like 4 hours, so I'm not going to shul at 7:30 in the morning. So I was having a cup of tea, and right around 8 o'clock, the bomb sirens started to go off in Yerushalayim. So I ran to wake up the girls, and we got into our bomb shelter in the house, which actually is Hersh's bedroom, and we closed the window and closed the door and waited the 10 minutes, and we didn't hear anything, so we came out. Obviously, normally on Shabbat, I would not be using my phone, but I knew the boys were camping out somewhere, and I knew rockets were falling somewhere. And I was like, I'm turning on my phone to make sure that Hersh is okay. And I turned on my phone. I think it was 8:20 when I turned on my phone, and instantly in the group that we have of the three of us, of John, Hersh, and myself, there were two messages that popped up, as you heard in the video. At 8:11, the first one said, "I love you," and the second one said, "I'm sorry." And as parents, or if you're not parents, picture your mother. You know, obviously my throat closed, my stomach clenched. I tried to call right away, and it just rang and rang. I wrote, "Are you okay?" 2 minutes later, I wrote, "Just tell me you're okay." And 2 minutes later, I said, "I'm leaving my phone on. Please tell me you're okay." And those never got blue checks. And, you know, we ended up finding out through these eyewitnesses. I mean, it was a whole process, because the first 24 hours we actually thought that he was dead, because we couldn't find any word from him. And there were all these lists going around that were inaccurate, and people would write to us and say, "Oh, thank God, look, he's on the list, he's at Kibbutz Saad." But what was happening is any survivors who made it to any kibbutzim, they were being asked, "Who did you see at the festival?" And they were creating lists from that of who was at the festival. It didn't mean that that person had ever made it to the kibbutz. And so finally, by Saturday night, we had, first of all, early in the afternoon, we already had maybe 20 people at the house, not to hug us and hold our hands. They were there to work. The wife of someone who's in Shabbat came. A good friend of ours who is high up in the army came. You know, people who could contribute to this crisis that we were in were surrounding us. And a lot of them haven't left. A lot of them are still part of our team. All of them are still part of our team, but a lot of them are daily still with us. By that evening, we had friends who took on the arduous, horrific task of going down to the hospitals in the south and going through the dead bodies, because there were so many, specifically from the Nova Festival. There were 367 bodies, and none of them were carrying their ID. And it was a horrifying task, and no one wanted us to have to do that. But imagine doing that just as a human being, having to go through that. And I'll let John describe sort of what we've been working on since that day. But our lives look, for us, when I was just saying Hallel on Shabbat, I was thinking to myself, first of all, like this, I did have a good feeling that came over me, but what was very strange was thinking, how can it be Adar when it's Simchat Torah? Because we truly live in a different place. And I'm sure some of you have heard me describe that, you know, we wake up, every morning I wake up and I say Moda Ani out loud, which I've always done since 7th grade when I learned it. And it's always fascinated me, those last two words, Rabba Emunatecha. I always think, wow, God believes in me. That's why I'm getting another day. And so I say Moda Ani. And then for a long time I would say, let today be the day. But last week I started to say, let's hear great news today. And yesterday we heard great news, right when we woke up. And then I make this very concerted effort that people may have heard me say, but I say to myself before I get out of bed, and now pretend to be a human. Because what I want to do is be on the floor in a ball in the fetal position, crying. But that's not going to save him. And that's not going to save any of them. And that's our mission. We have only one mission, to save our only son and the other 100 and now 33 Hershes. They're all Hersh. And that's what we've been working on.
So first of all, thank you all for being here. I know that the country overall, and certainly the demographic in this room, is that most people, or I should say everybody, is directly connected to Chayalim. Kids, husbands, fathers, sons-in-law, whatever it may be, and including everybody in this room. So thank you all for what your family is contributing. I know that there are people in the country who feel connected to the hostages, but maybe don't know any, or don't know any hostage families. So if nothing else, it's important for us to just put a face on what one family is going through. Rachel talked about people coming over to our apartment on the afternoon of the 7th, and we pulled out whiteboards and started to map out a plan, and it emerged over the next 36 to 48 hours. One of the things that we learned pretty quickly and have certainly had solidified since then is there's no roadmap for how to be the family of a hostage and try to save that hostage's life. We've actually been heard from and are now connected to hostages themselves and families of hostages from other hostage situations in the past, from Syria, from Afghanistan, and elsewhere. It's a pretty small community of people in the world. And the theme is, there is no roadmap. There are no right answers. And the first time it came up is as we were sitting on those whiteboards in the first 2 days talking about, should we go public with trying to raise awareness for this situation, or does that raise his value, and is that gonna be counterproductive? And it was on day 2 when we first heard from an eyewitness who was in the bomb shelter with Hersh that he was critically wounded with his arm blown off, that we said, it's a matter of just trying to save his life at this point. And so we think raising awareness probably doesn't hurt. Hopefully it helps, and so we're gonna do that. And that was one of the tracks that we mapped out early on, and we've been doing ever since, kind of a raise awareness track. And we've been doing that through traditional media, through social media. We've been consistently posting our whole story and journey at #BringHershHome across social channels. We're part of the broader Bring Them Home Now broad group of hostage families telling the stories, and we continue to do it. And we continue to hear from people around the world that, politicians and elected officials and people who are involved and who say, keep doing it, it's important. And we know that news cycles and congressional cycles all turn over quickly, and we must continue to tell the story so that these hostages do not get forgotten and do not get just left behind as the world moves on. The second track that we mapped out early on was a diplomacy political track. We are blessed to be citizens of 2 countries, Israel and the United States. We knew that both of those countries would be springing into action, but we said right at the beginning that that's great. We're not waiting for them, and we're not going to be beholden on them. We're going to do our own thing. And we've been doing that ever since. We have had several meetings with President Biden and every other member of his administration repeatedly, and have pretty open channels of communication. Similarly with the cabinet here and dozens of politicians here in this country, and other countries as well. And we have been working all of the above board diplomatic tracks, pushing every way possible. We continue to do that. We zig and zag based on what's going on in the news and what the rumors are about conversations happening, negotiations, not negotiating, and we adapt accordingly, but that has been taking up a lot of our time. I want to just share a couple of thoughts of our experience so far. One of them is, Rachel talked about being in rooms like this that strengthen us. One of maybe the only positive thing that's come out of this experience is the outpouring of support and the channels it comes from. And we've noticed a theme that people tend to reach out to us and say, I'm so-and-so, I live in this country, and this is my religion. There's kind of a template. But it's amazing how we literally get hundreds, thousands of messages from all over the world, people of all religions, all just sending words of support. I will tell you, I walked into the room tonight and Shira gave me a painting that she had made. I will say that's been one of the interesting things is art as a channel. We've had people sending us drawings of Rachel, drawings of Hersh, poems, all kinds of creative work. So that's been really strengthening. And it's happened here in Israel, which is to say that we do connect with people from all of the different segments of Israeli society. I'll mention the Haredi population. That's not our world, but we each separately and sometimes together have gone to that world for brachot, for tilim, for being strengthened, meeting with gedolim, and so on. And it's helpful. And the strength we've gotten from that segment of the population is actually amazing. I shared one story because it happened 2 weeks ago. I was in Bnei Brak one night making kind of a round of meetings with gedolim, and I walked into Mainei Yeshua Hospital, where Rav Zilberstein was giving a shiur to a room full of mostly Haredim, and I walked in with one other person, and one of his handlers went up to him and said that there's a father of a chatuf in the room, and he mid-sentence closed his Gemara, hit the table and said, Chaverim, pikuach nefesh. We are stopping the shiur now, and we must recite Tehillim. And he got up, and he started to cry, and it was the most powerful recitation of Tehillim from people who I don't know, and it's not a community that I'm a part of, but it's what they can do. So that's been really strengthening. I could talk a lot about the last 130 days. In some ways, as Rachel said, it's gone straight from Simchat Torah to Rosh Chodesh Adar. The speech that Rachel gave in the video that we watched was on day 18, 112 days ago. And amazingly, we oftentimes feel like nothing has changed, other than two big things when it comes to the hostages. Of course, there was the release from days 49, 50, 51, etc. We knew Hersh wouldn't be a part of it, but by that time, we had actually gotten to know pretty well the other hostage families. And so when the Alonis and the Rotems and many others were released in that period of time, we were celebrating it every night as we saw them coming out. We were celebrating those releases because we knew what they and their families had been going through. And then yesterday morning, when Fernando and Louise were released, we've gotten to know their family. Moshe, their brother-in-law, lives a few blocks away from us, and we were on a trip with him to Italy, a delegation, and the first thing we did yesterday morning when we heard the news is reached out to Moshe to just show our support for and our happiness for what he was experiencing. But because there's no roadmap, we don't know. We don't know if we're making progress, but we just continue to plow ahead and every day decide what do we think is going to be the thing that can most move the needle, and that is what we work on. I want to actually open it up, because we could keep talking, but I want to open it up to any questions, comments, ideas, and then we will certainly talk about just a few things that people in this room could do to try to be supportive to the hostages and their families. And I guess maybe we'll repeat the question because it'll be hard to hear.
I don't mean to be rude. First I want to say that Daniel Peretz, one of the hostages, is my friend's son. 2 weeks after the war started, I sat down with my children. My heart was in my throat, and I said, was it wrong for me to make Aliyah and to raise you here? And they said, no, there was Ima, no, things are going to be all right. Do you have any regrets, or what do you think?
The question is, do we have any regrets about making Aliyah? And the truth is, you're not the first person to have asked us that. In many interviews, they actually ask us that. And there's just no question. This is our life, and this is where we're supposed to be. And I actually spoke in Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph 2 nights ago, which was absolutely phenomenal. And what I said when I was speaking to them is, there's something very strange about the juxtaposition of the horror and the terror that we're going through with the beauty and the love that we're receiving. And it's very hard to navigate that, while we're in a place of extreme agony, but it's really incredible. And I was saying to them, obviously, we're very aware that we're everyone's worst nightmare. But I very much feel Kosi Revaya. It happens that at this moment in my life, that cup is overflowing with tears. But in Bigadol, I feel that I have a very blessed, meaningful, beautiful life that's so unrecognizable to the trajectory that my family was on. I come from just a completely non-affiliated family. My cousins are all married to, non-Jewish people and raising their children with Christmas trees, and there's nothing wrong with Christmas trees, they're very pretty. But, this is our life, and we don't feel regret. By the way, speaking of Christmas trees, we have, I think John touched on it just a bit, but I want to say the outpouring of support from the Christian community around the world has been absolutely staggering, to the point where on Christmas Eve we received young woman who was the one who said, you're going to need Instagram, you're going to need, the Twitter, you're going to need, I never even had Facebook. I kind of felt like I was not friends with him in first grade. Why would I want to know what he's up to now? Like, it never made sense to me, the construct. So, but thank God we have a lot of young people on the team, and they created this whole world of, social media for us. And why am I talking about that? What happened? Oh, no, he said you regret making Aliyah. Christmas. So on Christmas Eve, we received thousands of pictures of people's Christmas dinner table, with an extra plate, and they wrote Hersh. Thousands of people. And so poor Dahlia is like, what am I, because we try to respond to everybody, and there was just so much coming in. And one woman had even written, and I put him on the end because he's a lefty, and lefties are always difficult. And of course, I'm a lefty also, and Hersh now no longer has a left hand, but it was like she was just being sweet and funny. And actually, also when John mentioned that we met Moshe, this man, in a delegation that we took to Italy, is because I was asked to speak with the Pope. And the Catholic community has been so good to us, and we've been interviewed by the Vatican press and newspaper, I think, 3 times or something now, and during midnight mass, people had sent us 100 pictures of midnight mass where his poster is on the altar. Don't judge me. I didn't ask them to do that. I don't think he's like Jesus. But it was really meaningful because where was that coming from? And it's just this outpouring of beauty from around the world in this moment of, we're in something that psychologists call ambiguous trauma, because normal trauma, which I think everybody unfortunately has had some sort of trauma in their lives, and normative trauma is you're walking down the street and the truck hits you from behind and you didn't see it coming, and now your life has been turned upside down, right? It could be a death of someone close to you. It could be someone coming home and saying, I want a divorce. It could be, whatever, name your trauma. But at a certain point, you decide, when am I going to sit up from the side of the road? When am I going to stand? When am I going to try to take my first step or second step? Our problem is the truck is still on top of us. I have an 18-wheeler, and one of the wheels is on top of my chest. And that's why it's so, we're so mission driven, and people ask, what do we do? I mean, John and I have not gone back to our jobs since October 5th. We have an amazing, very large team, and then we have this nugget of 3 people that are working with us full time, have left their lives to work with us full time, and are incredible. Our good friend from back in Chicago, Richard Dem. We have Matt Krieger, who's in the back tonight, who's very patient, because I ask him 45 times a day, where are we going now? And he'll tell me, and then he tells me again in a nice way, so that he doesn't make me feel bad that I can't remember anything. And we have Dahlia Khan, thank God, the one who does all of our social media. And then we have many others in these expanding circles around us.
We won't get through too many questions if we...
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not blaming Rachel. I'm actually blaming myself because I want to actually add on to the question about making Aliyah. Over the last week, we've been feeling a disturbing thing happen, which is several people have said to us things like, we're with you, we're praying for you, we support you, and the hostage families. But you need to remember, you're 136, and we're 9 million. And I said, Ma zatem v'anachnu? Anachnu chelek me'am. And there's this interesting phenomenon happening where the hostage families are being made to feel a little bit separate from the Now, I mentioned that yesterday in a meeting to Benny Gantz, and he said, I look at 3 key periods in the history of Israel as influential. The first was May 14th, 1948, and he's got a letter up on his wall. The second was Yom Kippur, 1973, and the third is right now. How we, as the state of Israel, and how we as the Jewish people respond to what is happening right now is going to set us on the path for generations, and we could be on a good path or not a good path. And we went on to talk about the need for achdut, not to allow there to be a pilug in the And so as it relates to the question of Aliyah, we have no regrets. I do think that how we all come out of this period, how together we are, or how divided we are, and how we respond to it, will further influence how we answer that question in a year or 2 or 5 or 25.
Well, now, because we only had one question, so now, and I wanted to add on to that something that, again, I didn't grow up with a lot of Yahadut in my life, but I grew up with Jewish values, and my mom always used to say, Jews value life. And so you can, this is not accurate, but this is what she said. In the Bible, you can break all the rules to save a life. I know, Alon Shvut, you can't break all the rules. There's the bad three. But, you know, I grew up with this idea that we do crazy things as Jews because we value life. And that's something to be proud of and to embrace. So we don't always do the rational thing. And a couple days ago, I suddenly turned to John and I said, oh my gosh, you know who I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about Ishmael, because that's what I do. I said, remember when Hagar and Ishmael were cast out, and Ishmael starts to die, and he cries out to Hashem, and Hashem is going to save him. And Rashi says, the Malchei Hamlachim say to Hashem, what are you, bananas? You're going to save this guy who's going to be the father of Amalek, who's going to be the father of Haman, who's going to be the father of the Nazis, who's going to be the father of Hamas. Don't save him. And Hashem says, I am a God of Rachamim, and I'm saving him. And we, as Jews, always say we're B'Tselem Elokim, and we try to walk and be like God, to be godly in so many ways. And I think to myself, if God could save Ishmael, knowing that doing so would end up causing trouble, Kal v'chomer, how can we not save these 134 people from the who are there, who are grandfathers, who are children, who are husbands, not to mention the 19 women still there, presumed now to be pregnant. We need to save these people. And John always says, the price will be high. And the price, if we don't save them, will be higher. Because we will never be who we are again. And I think that that's an important point just to make. Are there more questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for coming and sharing your story. I think maybe many people feel like me, that in a way we feel, what can we be doing? I would say for myself, it's very hard. You know, I read the dog tank, this is important for me to every day have in my mind, having my tefillot, say Tehillim. But on a practical level, on a day-to-day basis, how can we, an average citizen, help?
Yeah, so the question is, what can all of you do to help? 130 days into this, we wish we had a better answer. That's the point. There is no clear, obvious answer. Tefillot for sure help. Support the Chayalim who are playing such an important role in, among other things, trying to bring home the Chatufim. But beyond those things, the three things that we talk about are, number one, tell the story, spread the story, don't let the story fall off the radar here in Israel, outside of Israel, whatever countries you may come from originally, if not Israel, just keep telling the story. And we try to make it easy by doing it at Bring Hersh Home. You could just share it, repost what we post. You could repost all the content coming out of Bring Them Home Now, but just keep it in the global conversation. The second thing is, we sat in a meeting, and I can now say who it is. We always say an official in the US, but we were in a meeting with the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, relatively early on, and I said to him, what would you do if you were a parent to somebody held hostage? And he said, it might bother us, but call us every day. Call the White House, stay on us, keep us accountable, but be in touch with us by phone, by email, by text. They track it all, and it all does get to them. And so we've been doing that. And we were part of a group that created a website called 1 Min a Day. It literally does take less than 1 minute a day to do this, and we make it turnkey simple. And now we've got hundreds of thousands of people calling the White House every day, and it is working, and it matters. Or emailing, or texting, contacting them. Those were the two things that we were saying for the first 115 days or so. And what we've now added as a third one is do that same thing that we're asking people to do to the White House here in Israel. Meaning, of course, people here in Israel are more aware of what's happening, but we need this government and we need this cabinet to make sure that within all of what they're focusing on with the war, and I always say B'tzedek, that they also are making sure that they are accounting for the Chatufim and bringing home the Chatufim alive, as many as possible. There's been a lot of talk coming out of this cabinet about two equal goals, and without getting too political here, we have sometimes felt that their actions are indicating that one goal is of course happening 24/7, again, as it should, and the other one is coming and going. We'll talk about whether we should go to the table and talk. We'll talk about whether we should send somebody to go to meetings where talks are happening. We will, we won't. We know that we believe that the way to bring the Huskies home ultimately is going to be a combination of factors, and that some form of negotiation is going to be a part of what brings them home. And so we ask people to please stay on top of this government, to push them to do what's right for the Chatufim as well.
A question of your practical steps that you're taking for when Hersh comes home. He's going to be without an arm. So how are you? It's hard to be practical and also hopeful.
So, thank you. The question is practical steps we're taking for when Hersh comes home. And I'm going to hand it to Rachel to take most of the answer, but one thing I'll say is, certainly in our neighborhood of Jerusalem, it's hard to move without seeing Hersh. We've got everybody in our broad neighborhood has banners and posters and stickers, and Hersh is everywhere in our part of Jerusalem. And the one thing we joke about is he's going to kill us when he gets home because he's everywhere. And we say we are so ready for him to be upset with us about that. That is something we will happily address.
Yes, we say we would be so zocha to absorb that anger that, first of all, as we mentioned before, that we've never seen. We haven't really allowed ourselves to go too much into what that will look like. But as time has passed, obviously when we first heard about Hersh losing his arm, and then subsequently, I think most people know that a week later we were being interviewed by Anderson Cooper at CNN, and he said to us at the end of the interview, "You guys, I'm going to call you now," which we thought was really weird. So we were off air, and he called and he said, "I have a video of Hersh being kidnapped." Because he had gone down to the Nova Festival area to do a documentary. And he ended up speaking with Chayalim that were there. And one of the Chayalim said, "We found this camera, this GoPro that fell off of one of the helmets of one of the people from Hamas." And they shared the footage with Anderson Cooper, which he showed in the documentary that he made for CNN. And one of the pieces of the footage is of Hersh being led by gunpoint, you saw in the video, and loaded onto the truck. And that was how we were able to really know, the extent of his injury. And of course, immediately that was, this additional sickening blow. It was like one thing after the other. But what's happened over, now this long is that we're much more worried about other parts of his mental and emotional and psychological recovery. But I'm sure he'll want a bionic arm, and then he'll go into bars and challenge people to arm wrestling, because that's his personality.
Yes, so we're not actually taking too many practical steps, as Rachel said, but I will mention on the physical injury, we've had several trauma specialists, surgeons reach out to us and say to us, as soon as he comes home, we are going to get him the best treatment, the best prosthetic that he could possibly have. We both grew up in Chicago. One of the Illinois senators is Senator Tammy Duckworth, who had both of her legs blown off. She was a combat pilot and lost both of her legs. And so she's particularly interested in issues of major injuries and prosthetics. And we've been in touch with her office, met her several times, and she's vying to get us to come to the US to get the best treatment there. So we like that there's kind of this competition.
Your media and messaging has been very strong and very on point. And in light of what's going around the world and anti-Semitism, how is it that the Chatufim have been conflated into the war and not as a humanitarian issue? And what can be done? What are you doing?
So the question is about media and how is it that the hostages have been conflated into a political issue rather than be seen as what we think it is, which is a global humanitarian crisis. We've been trying to make that case for most of the last 130 days, which is we live, all of us, as we know, in a politically charged region. It causes people in the world to have very strong reactions, one way or the other, this region, in this country. And that's fine. And we even have been saying to people as we talk around the world, if you want to be critical of Israel's actions in the Middle East, that's a conversation that it's fair to have, and we can have that conversation. But initially, 242 people were taken mostly from their beds and from a music festival. And they were from 9 months old at the time to 87 years old. And everything that people in this room probably know about the demographics and representatives of 39 different countries. And we tried, and we still do, so hard to every time we talked, especially outside of Israel, to paint this as the issue of a global humanitarian crisis. And we could talk for a long time about it, but you're right, Corey, that we probably, or not probably, we have largely failed to do that. And it's really frustrating. And on our first trip to New York, on day 17, 18, was when we were walking around the streets of New York and watching people. This is when the kidnapped posters were becoming a really big thing, and they were all over New York. And we were walking down the streets, and we saw as people were pulling them down, and not just pulling them down, and not just pulling down posters of people like Hersh, but like we literally watched as somebody pulled down the poster of Joshua Molel, who now has been confirmed dead, but he was a 21-year-old African, Black, Christian student studying in Israel, and people were pulling his poster down as we watched them on the streets of New York. So we have just failed to paint this for what it is, and it has unfortunately become conflated in the ongoing another piece of the long-standing Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Gaza, Israeli-Hamas conflict.
I always say that if the exact same constellation of hostages had been taken, that exact same, portrait that John painted, and they were taken to Dallas, Texas, everyone in the world would have been in Dallas, Texas on October 8th to save them. The same way that when those boys, the team, that soccer team, the Thai boys got in that weird cave. How did they even get in that cave? Nobody knows. And the whole world showed up, and it took almost 3 weeks to get them out. But, it was a crisis that everyone joined together to resolve. And we obviously know why it's conflated. Because people like to look for a reason to conflate things in this neck of the woods. And, we have actually talked a lot and been asked to talk a lot on campuses, in different Zooms about sort of the broader crisis of anti-Semitism, especially in North America. And we just say, we have to triage our goals at this time. And so right now, our most important mission is saving Hersh's life and the life of the other 133 hostages. So we're not really part of that. And we hope that we'll get to a point where once Hersh is home, that we can then maybe be advocates in a better way. Anything that Israel has asked us to do, we do. Even to the most interesting thing, I think, because I have to really kind of think about it, because talking to the Pope was interesting, and talking to Elon Musk was interesting. But it's again, I'm losing my train of thought because I haven't slept in 129 days. So I'll stop there, and if it comes back to me, then I'll raise my hand again. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes.
So it's kind of related, but what happens when, how does the Red Cross fit into all of this? And like, what happens when you talk to the Red Cross or try to put pressure on them? But there's also another thing that's going on now. There's at South Tasha, where a group of families of hostages and other people who care about this are trying to prevent humanitarian aid from entering Kerem Shalom. Like, is that worthwhile? Is that something that could help?
So just quickly on the Red Cross, I invested dozens of hours in the first 40 days or so, personally and through other people working with me, reaching out to the Red Cross in Tel Aviv, in London, in Geneva, in Washington, and they kept saying, we want to go in, but we're not being allowed in. Finally, on day 67, we were in Geneva, and we went to Red Cross headquarters, global headquarters, and sat in a small room right across the table from senior level people in the Red Cross, and we asked pointed questions. I looked at one guy right like this far away from me, and I said, you keep saying that Hamas is not letting you in. There's Hamas political leadership in Qatar, there's military leadership in Gaza. Who is not letting you in? I want to know the names. Who are you talking to who's not letting you in? And he then went on to give a 6 or 7 minute answer that was basically like reading his marketing materials. Well, we're a global organization and we operate around the world to save lives. And he never answered the question. And that happened a few times. And we walked out of there and said, we have a limited number of hours per day. We're not going to waste 1 more minute on trying to get the Red Cross to do anything. The only thing we did after that is we discovered that the United States funds about $625 million a year of the Red Cross's budget. And we've made it clear to people in Congress that 0 American citizens have seen any benefit in this conflict from the Red Cross, and they should reconsider that. You asked about kind of stopping humanitarian aid at Kerem Shalom. Even within the group of hostage families, as you can imagine, there's a lot of debate about what are the right things to do and the wrong things to do, what's productive, what's not productive. That is one of the hot issues. We have not gone down there. The argument in favor of it is what they're really saying, and it's not getting painted well, but what the people who are there blocking aid are really saying is humanitarian aid in exchange for humanitarian aid. So if we know that aid is getting into the hostages, then we're okay having aid go to other people, which I think is very fair and makes sense. In general, the counter-argument is it looks bad when we're withholding humanitarian aid. What does it say about the kind of people we are and so on? I don't know. I'm not going to weigh in on that, but my broad kind of thought on what's productive and what's right is it's hard to know. Every family is doing what they think is best. And what I keep saying is what we've learned really acutely in this experience is there's thinking with your head and there's thinking with your heart. And so much of what the families are doing, including those families, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, is just driven by emotion and desperation. Families feel like we're watching hostages die, whether the number is only 31 that are dead, or closer to 51, as has been reported? We don't even know. But what we know is every day, every hour, every minute that hostages are still held hostage, the risk of them dying goes up and up. And so families are just desperate, and they are doing whatever it is that they think might be productive.
I did remember, I just want to say quickly that one of the interesting things that Israel asked me to do was come and speak to a group of African priests who were coming on a solidarity mission. And I learned a lot from them, and they really cried with us. And they said to him in English, which is great for me. And that was a really beautiful thing. And that was, what was sad is a priest from Joshua Molel's community came to that, on that solidarity mission. There was a hand, yes.
I want to ask, because maybe you would have said it, but do you speak to the hostages that have been released, and is anybody giving you any sign of life?
So the question is, have we spoken to the hostages that have been released, and has anyone given us a sign of life? So the hostages who were released were very much interrogated by us, meaning not us, John and me, but by Israel. And we, out of respect to the trauma that they went through, haven't gone directly to them. There's a line of communication that was given back to all the other hostages who are still there. What they have told all of us is that really what they tried to do, especially for the hostages that were taken early, and Hersh was taken very early, is they took them first for medical treatment because they were really trying to keep them alive, especially the early arrivals, because Hamas had no idea they were going to be that successful. They had no idea, because we often say number 242, but apparently it was 252 that they ended up with. I mean, they really hit the jackpot that morning. And so, but they didn't know that it was going to last that long. They kept thinking, oh, well, the army's going to show up any minute. So, and we had a problem that morning, which I do have to say that it has been very helpful as the mother of someone who is still suffering from that day, that we've had people from the army apologize. And we have had people in the intelligence world apologize. And you know what? That's what responsible people do. That's what we teach our children, right? When they're little, they don't mean it. They say, sorry. You hit your brother, what do you say? Sorry. But, we train them so that as they get older, they take responsibility. And so what we heard from the hostages that were released is that it seems that everyone, even people, and there were a lot of the kids who were in those roadside bomb shelters had spontaneous amputations because of the nature of how the bomb shelters are about 5 feet by 8 feet, and each of them, there were 6. They were each first, they had grenades thrown in. In the one that Hersh was in, his best friend Honor, who he was with, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this footage of he was picking them up and throwing them out, and he was a complete hero, and he managed to do that 7 times, which is impressive because I have since learned that from the time you pull the pin on a grenade, you have 4.5 seconds until it detonates. So Honor was in the doorway, picking them up, throwing them up, picking them up, and on the 8th one it exploded in his hand and killed him. But a lot of it, and then they threw in 3 grenades. So there was a lot of real carnage from those bomb shelters, and our understanding is that people who were treatable, people who didn't lose conscious, people who weren't too injured to be too much trouble, were treated. And as you saw in the video, Hersh walks on his own 2 feet. I mean, he does have a gun at his back, but he's walking, and he seems, I'm sure he's shell-shocked, I'm sure he's in trauma and, despair, but he is in control. And we have an Army representative, especially in light of last week when the Wall Street Journal and New York Times articles came out, among others, but saying that there were many more dead hostages than was previously reported. Our Army contact, who, we have an Army representative and a government representative assigned to each family, she always calls before there's bad news. So, for example, when the 3 hostages were tragically killed by accident, we knew about it before it went public. Anytime there's anything scary, she's in touch with us first. And so she contacted us last week and she said, listen, the saying, no news is good news. She said, the families have been notified and Hersh is not on that list. So they kind of do that, it's very Gemara, like it's very, if you're not hearing, so then, so their working assumption is that he is alive. And so our working assumption is that he is alive. And everyone in here has to have their working assumption that they're alive. I said today to someone, hope is mandatory.
I think that's a great place for us to close this evening. Hope is mandatory. And we all need to keep saying tefillot and doing all the things that John and Rachel have said that can help. And just being here tonight, all of you in Gush Etzion means a ton. Rachel and I were talking about it the other day, and we were like, can we do this? And I said, yeah, I think everybody will come out. So thank you all for coming. We're going to say another parak of Tehillim now. We're going to sing a chenut together, and we're going to sing Hatikva. And then Rachel and John are going to be able to go out. We need to let them get back. And the posters and the book is still here. If you haven't had a chance to sign in, please stay here and sign. So I will get the book to Rachel and John later with all the chizuk and all the things you want to do to help in America bringing Hersh home and all of the hostages. Now we're going to say a parak of Tehillim.
שיר המעלות ממעמקים קראתיך אדוני. אדוני שמע בקולי, תהיינה אוזניך קשובות לכל תחנוני. אם עוונות תשמוריה, אדוני מי יעמוד. כי עמך סליחה למען תברר. קיוויתי אדוני קיוותה נפשי ולדברו אוכלתי. נפשי לאדוני משמרים לבוקר, שמרים לבוקר. יחל ישראל אל אדוני, כי עם אדוני החסד והרבה עמו פדות. והוא יפדה את ישראל מכל עוונותיו.